In every great city, there are shining towers, flashing lights, and names written in gold. But beyond the polished glass, there are corners the world chooses not to see. Corners where children walk alone, not because they're brave, but because no one is holding their hand. And in one such corner, there lived a boy with a rag and a broken heart. Micah had no family, no warm bed, and no one who waited for him. At 12 years old, he had already buried more hope than most men did in a lifetime. He lived in the shadows of the city beneath, staircases behind closed shops, and sometimes in the quiet corners of empty churches. He survived by cleaning shoes for strangers who rarely looked down, let alone cared. His world smelled of old leather, cold rain, and the sharp sting of loneliness. But Micah moved with purpose. Every morning he rose before the sun, walked through streets littered with yesterday's garbage, and found a spot near the subway where businessmen passed in a rush. That was his corner, his station of survival. With a small box, a brush, and a heart that still hoped someone might see him, he knelt and waited. Some days, he made enough to buy a slice of bread. Other days, he went to sleep with nothing but the echo of footsteps walking past him. But he never begged. He never asked. He gave dignity to the one thing he could offer, his effort. And one morning, something shifted. The rain had fallen all night, and the city was soaked in gray. Micah's fingers were numb as he arranged his supplies. People passed like always, umbrellas hiding their faces, eyes fixed on their screens. Then came a man, not young, not old, wearing a long brown coat and simple shoes caked in mud. He stood before Micah, motionless. He didn't say a word. Just stood there. Micah, out of habit, knelt and began to clean as he worked. The man didn't move. Micah's hands shook from the cold, but he polished carefully. Like every pair of shoes before, he treated them with respect. And when he was done, he gave a nod and moved to the side. The man looked at him, and then walked away. No coin. No thanks. Just silence. But in that silence, something had been planted. Micah didn't know the man. He didn't know the coat, the face, or the tired eyes. What he didn't know was that he had just touched the soul of the one man who held power over the entire city, the mayor, in disguise, watching, listening, and now remembering. The streets returned to their rhythm, and Micah returned to his routine, rising early, brushing off the chill, and kneeling before a world that rarely noticed his presence. Days blurred together like streaks of rain on a window. To him, that morning had been like any other. Just another pair of shoes. Just another face in the crowd. But for the man in the brown coat, it wasn't ordinary at all. He couldn't forget the boy. As mayor of the city, he had spent years in meetings, surrounded by polished voices and clean suits. He had signed papers, approved budgets, attended banquets, and given speeches about the future. But in all that noise, he had somehow forgotten how to see. Truly see. That day, disguised in an old coat and muddy shoes, he had walked the city not as a leader, but as a stranger, a silent observer, invisible like so many others he had failed to protect. And then he met Micah, a child who did not flinch, a child who expected nothing, a child who showed him, without a word, the weight of forgotten people. That evening, back in his high-rise office, the mayor sat in silence. The city lights blinked outside his window, but he didn't see them. He kept thinking of the boy's hands, red from cold, yet steady. He remembered the way the boy polished the shoes as if they belonged to a king, even though they had walked through nothing but dirt. There was something sacred in it. Something ancient. The mayor, once a boy from a poor neighborhood himself, remembered his own shoes being cleaned by someone else, his father, who died in silence before ever being thanked. He had come so far, but perhaps he had also drifted too far. The next morning, he returned. No cameras, no security, just the same coat and the same shoes. This time already clean. Micah wasn't there. The spot was empty. Only a puddle remained, reflecting gray skies and the absence of a boy the city didn't know it had lost. The mayor stood still for a long time. In the silence, he realized the truth. A city isn't measured by the height of its towers, but by how it treats those who live in its shadows. And in that shadow, he had found a boy who had reminded him of his own humanity. He made a decision that morning, not with words, not with announcements, but with action, because sometimes the most powerful change begins not in a speech, but in the quiet grace of a child on his knees, offering the world a glimpse of dignity it had long forgotten. Micah had vanished, but the impression he left could not be erased. The mayor returned to his daily duties, but the rhythm of power no longer satisfied him. Behind every document he signed, behind every meeting and handshake, there now echoed the image of a small boy kneeling on the wet pavement, polishing shoes. That didn't matter, but doing it with more pride than most men brought to their professions. Micah had become a shadow that followed him into every polished room. But it was not guilt that haunted the mayor, it was awakening. For so long, he had walked above the city, never truly beneath it. But now, he couldn't stop thinking about what lived under the surface. So he went back day after day. Each morning, in the same coat and the same worn shoes, he stood at the place where he had met the boy. He waited, he watched, he listened too. The city's rhythm, but Micah never returned. People passed him. No one noticed he was the mayor. Some tossed him coins. Others ignored him entirely. And the longer he stood there, the more he began to see what Micah had seen his entire life, a world that looked past pain as if it were part of the sidewalk. The mayor's silence grew heavier with each passing day. He asked no one for answers. He did not send out a search. He knew how fragile the life of a forgotten child was. To chase him with official power might only drive him further into hiding. No, this was something else. Something sacred. Something that needed time. Meanwhile, Micah had found a different corner. His old spot had been swept away by city workers, and his small box of supplies had been stolen during the night by another child. Desperate for survival, he didn't cry, he didn't chase, he simply moved. He began cleaning shoes in a darker alley, where fewer people walked. Days passed with almost no earnings. His hands cracked from the cold, his stomach often empty, but still, he worked. Because working meant living. And Micah had chosen to live. He had no idea that just a few blocks away, the most powerful man in the city was standing still, waiting for him. No cameras, no banners, just a heart breaking slowly open. And what neither of them knew was that the quiet between them was growing louder than any speech ever could. Because when a boy disappears from the shadows and a leader steps into them, change is not just possible, it becomes inevitable. The world moved forward as it always did. Trains ran, horns blared, people rushed to appointments they barely remembered scheduling. But within the heart of the city, something subtle had begun to shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't announced. But it was real. The mayor, once untouchable behind podiums and guarded doors, had started walking again, without entourage, without press. No one noticed him passing. But he noticed everything. He saw the way the wind pushed against children, too small for their coats. He saw elderly hands digging through trash while city leaders debated funding for statues. He saw because Micah had taught him to. And though he hadn't found the boy again, he had found himself. Each evening, he returned to the bench across the subway station, where the boy once worked in silence. He sat still, watching the ground, remembering the sound of shoes being brushed by hands that expected nothing in return. Then one afternoon, the mayor rose and left without a word. He returned to City Hall, not to hold a meeting, but to make a decision. That night, lights stayed. and long after everyone had gone. The office grew quiet as his pen scratched paper after paper, rewriting policies, redirecting resources, restructuring the way the city cared for its people. There were no speeches, no applause. Just a man finally doing what should have been done long ago. A new fund was created, anonymous at first. A quiet ripple in the city's giant sea. Its purpose: to locate and support unregistered, undocumented, and abandoned children, those who, like Micah, lived between cracks no one cared to fix. The mayor visited shelters in secret. He listened to their stories. He opened old files, called forgotten names, and sent help where silence once ruled. But Micah still remained a mystery until the day everything paused. The rain was falling again, just like the day they met and at the corner of a church entrance. Beneath a crooked awning, the mayor saw him, smaller than before, thinner, his face hollow with hunger. But it was him. Micah. Cleaning shoes once again, with a piece of cloth nearly torn in half. The mayor stood frozen, breath caught in his throat. This time, he didn't step forward. He watched, reverently, quietly, like one would observe a flame in the dark. And in that moment, he knew this child was not a symbol of poverty. He was a mirror of the city's soul. The mayor stood in the rain longer than he should have, water soaking through his coat, but he didn't move. Across the street, Micah continued working in silence, bent over a pair of boots that had already been half ruined by time. His movements were slower, now less steady, more fragile. The rain mixed with mud and polish on the boy's hands, but still, he worked. He always worked, and still, no one noticed. The world passed by, but the mayor saw everything. That night, he didn't return to his office. He didn't return home. Instead, he wandered into the streets Micah had known for years. He followed no map, no driver, just instinct. He walked through the cold, through alleys, under flickering street lamps. He saw what power had hidden from him for so long. He understood now. Micah wasn't just a poor boy. He was the city's forgotten heartbeat. So, the mayor did something he had never done before, not as a leader, but as a man. He left a gift. No grand gesture. No officials. No cameras. Just a small clean box, placed beside the spot where Micah worked each morning. Inside, there was a brand new pair of waterproof boots, a thick jacket, a blanket still warm from packaging, and a sealed envelope with no name, only the words, "For the boy who kneels in the rain." No sender, no signature. Because dignity requires no spotlight. The next morning, Micah found the box before the sun had risen. At first, he thought someone had dropped it by mistake. Then he opened it. He stood still for a long time, staring at the contents. His breath was visible in the freezing air. His fingers shook, not from cold this time, but from disbelief. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply sat down and touched the boots with quiet hands, as if they were something sacred. He put them on, slowly, gently, as though afraid they'd vanish if he moved too fast. And when he wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and felt warmth he hadn't known in years, he didn't ask who had given it. He didn't need to know, because somewhere deep in his heart, Micah believed in small kindnesses. He believed in good things, finding people who never asked. What he didn't know was that across the street, hidden behind the shadows of a stone column, the mayor had watched the entire moment unfold. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there, his eyes glistening, not from the rain, but from something far deeper. Because, for the first time in his life, he had given without power. And it had changed him more than any election ever could. Winter crept deeper into the city's bones. Frost clung to glass, breath curled in the air, and hearts grew colder with the season. But one heart, once hardened by politics and position, was thawing with every silent act of redemption. Mayor became a man reborn in secrecy. Each morning before sunrise, he left something behind for Micah, always small, always anonymous. A meal in a clean paper bag. A pair of thick socks. A book with pages marked gently. A scarf woven from real wool. And always a note with no name. Sometimes a sentence, sometimes a single word. Stay warm. You matter. Keep going. No orders. No rules, just kindness freely given. Never explained. Micah never asked why these gifts appeared. He accepted them with quiet gratitude, believing perhaps that the city itself had finally grown a heart. In truth, it wasn't the things that kept him going, it was the feeling. That somewhere, someone cared, and that was all he ever needed. But the mayor wasn't just helping Micah now. His private mission expanded. He began walking the streets longer, speaking with those the system had left behind. He rerouted funds. From useless projects into silent programs, ones that required no application, no paperwork. Just presence. Blankets in shelters. Meals in corners. Shoes outside church doors. All in the shadows. All unannounced. He understood now. Charity wasn't charity when it sought praise. Real kindness was quiet. It didn't raise flags. It kneeled low, like Micah, and worked with its hands. Back at City Hall, whispers began to grow. Assistants noticed. Changes. Meetings were missed. Budgets were being moved. No one knew what the mayor was doing, but the streets were starting to feel different, warmer. And yet, through it all, the mayor never spoke of the boy, not to his staff. Not to his friends. Because this mission wasn't political. It was personal. Knew the boy still didn't know who he was. And that was okay. Because the greatest transformations often begin in silence. And Micah, without even knowing it, had turned the most powerful man in the city into a servant once again. The seasons shifted again. Snow melted into streams, wind softened, and the gray sky began to bloom with early hints of spring. But even as flowers returned to windowsills and laughter returned to parks, one place remained untouched by celebration. The small corner where a boy still knelt each morning, rag in hand, heart in silence. Micah had changed, not in appearance, not in size, but in presence. He walked taller now, not from pride, but from warmth. He was no longer invisible to himself. Each step he took was grounded in quiet belief that his life mattered, even if the world never said so aloud. And though he never knew the face behind the gifts, he felt the love that lingered in every corner where mercy had touched him. Meanwhile, the mayor stood at the edge of his final term. His team urged him to run again, to claim credit for the changes sweeping the city. His name had become a symbol of reform. Homeless centers had grown. Youth programs blossomed. Shelters expanded. People spoke of a miracle, but he said nothing because the real miracle he knew had no name. It were cracked shoes. It held a brush in frozen fingers. It looked up at a stranger once not to ask for help, but to give it. Micah had never spoken to him, and yet he had spoken to his soul on his last day in office.